Welcome to Chills with Chats. We're going to continue the Haunted Heartland series. I will be finished reading Chapter 3 in its entirety. This will be a long video, and I might continue reading chapter by chapter this way. So, I hope you'll enjoy. The Guttenberg Poltergeist. In 1959, the William Mayer House, near Guttenberg, Iowa, was the most exciting place in Clayton County. In fact, it was so exciting that on December 17th, the family fled. A poltergeist had taken over the premises. As the Mayers were sitting in their living room late one evening, a crash shook the house. The couple hurried into the kitchen to find their refrigerator tipped over. In the next instant, a flower stand flew across the room and splintered against the stove. Then an egg rose from a basket on the windowsill, soaring through the air, and bounced off the door. Miss Mayer was frightened speechless. Her husband was bewildered. How could these things happen? Had pranksters got into the house? A thorough search revealed no hidden wires or any other devices that could have propelled the objects into space. Too upset to stay in the kitchen to prepare dinner that night, Miss Mayer insisted that the couple eat out. She felt more relaxed away from the house and out amongst the people. In fact, while she was gone, she almost forgot about the destruction in the house. Later that night, Miss Mayer decided to read herself asleep. She placed a glass of water on the nightstand and climbed into bed with her book. The glass rose from the table, hung in midair, and exploded onto her head, showering her with water and shards of glass. Her husband, who had witnessed the incident, was as frightened as his wife. He suggested that they move into another room, which they did, but no sooner had the Mayers in the bed than soot began falling on them from what was supposedly a solid ceiling. In the morning, Bill Mayer called the sheriff. The constable tramped through the house, and nothing moved in his presence. He was called home instantly, but promised to check back later. When he returned to the Mayer place, he found the couple in their front yard. They claimed that several chairs had scooted across the floor, and that every window in the house had cracked. The Mayers couldn't explain the movement of the chairs or the broken windows. To their knowledge, no one had been lurking around the house, and they had heard no noise to indicate the breaking of glass. The sheriff examined the window and shook his head. He confessed that he could not help them. The problem was beyond the long arm of the law. Word ensued spread of the strange ongoings at Bill Mayer's house, and visitors from Guttenberg and neighboring communities besieged the family. A towboat captain on the Mississippi River arrived one night with some friends. "I was just wondering, ma'am," he began, "if I could spend the night. You see, I don't believe in ghosts." Miss Bear courteously offered the captain a bedroom. Shortly after he had gone to bed, his friends and the Mayers were drinking coffee at the kitchen table. Then they heard a loud commotion in the bedroom. They rushed to the room. There the river pilot lay on the mattress, which was now on the floor 8 feet away from the bed frame. The perplexing captain had no idea how he had gotten there. Some time later, a Northwestern University psychologist visited the Mayer house to study the unexplained phenomena. He said that the activity was a result of some intelligent motivation. He explained that the work of the poltergeist is usually set in motion by a young person who unconsciously transfers his suppressed rage and energy force into inanimate objects. By that time, however, the Mayers didn't care much for theories. Wary of visitors, of assault by unseen tormentors, and too many sleepless nights, they moved out. The house, however, had become so synonymous that curiosity seekers could not stay away. They arrived regularly, uninvited, trampling to the place and spreading stories about the antics of the house. Eventually the mayor sold the house to their former neighbor, the Wallace Finnegans. Vandals then began attacking the house, smashing windows and breaking down doors. Young people came from near and far to hold all-night beer bursts in the house. Miss Finnegan, in desperation, filled the house with hay and turned it into a barn. The Guttenberg poltergeist was never heard from again. Okay, the next tale is the Telltale Tombstone. At the turn of the century, Heinrich Schultz and his wife Olga were murdered in cold blood in their house in the middle of the night. The people of Washta wouldn't recall a more heinous crime in all of Cherokee County. They spoke of it with outrage and fear. The Schultz were a kind elderly couple who farmed a short distance from the house. They were well respected by all they knew, and they had no known enemies. In fact, they had lots of admirers amongst both neighbors and townspeople. The Schultz were honest, God-fearing people who tithed both money and time to their church. At every congregational dinner, Olga could be found in the kitchen timing out her prized strudel and dumplings. Heinrich cared for the church grounds and donated a number of flower shrubs to beautify the little rustic building. The couple had been in Iowa for only 5 years. Heinrich's lifelong dream was to own a fine farm in America, and he and Olga had saved for years in order to finance their immigration from Germany to Iowa farm with his rich black soul. The couple had no children, so Heinrich would hire young men from the neighborhood to help with the chores. All of them preferred working for old man Schultz, so they fondly called him. Because he paid well, he also demanded an honest day's work. A few days before his death, Heinrich had withdrawn a considerable amount of money from the bank. Then had been rumors, later proven false, of implementing bank failures, and the contagious farm fearing the loss of his life savings. He and Heather decided the money would be safer at home. The couple were found 3 days later, their heads split open with an axe. There were signs of a struggle. The Schultz money was gone, and so was Will Florence, a hired hand employed by the Schultz. He had first appeared in the area 3 months earlier, during haying season. A number of farmers, suspicious of a stranger with no visible meaning of support, told Florence they had no work and turned him away. But Heinrich hired the fellow and provided him with boarding and room in addition to a small salary. Although the neighbors were uneasy, Heinrich defended his decision. "The man's down and out," he explained. "I'm pleased to give him a chance." Florence proved to be inexperienced and inept at farm work, but Heinrich instructed him with patience and understanding. Florence revealed little of himself except to say that he had some medical problems and had been recuperating from surgery at the house of his sister in Texas. Now he wanted to make his own way. Olga liked his determination and his quiet manner, and treated him with the son she never had. Every Sunday at church, Florence had sat between Heinrich and Olga, although locating William Florence after the murder seemed an impossibility. He was eventually found in Nebraska and brought out to Iowa for questioning. A grand judge examined him and discharged him for lack of evidence. Florence then vanished for good. He was never seen again, at least not in the flesh. The curious story, however, soon circulated through Washta. An old woman, one of the first to suspect Florence of the slaying, told her closest friends that the murderer's face had begun to appear on the headstone over the Schultz's grave. She claimed that the face was unmistakably the William Florence. Her friends ridiculed her. Of course, even those who visited the grave to satisfy their curiosity saw nothing that resembled a man's face upon the stone of plain marble. Yet old lady insisted that she saw Florence's portrait on this unadorned stone. She went as far as to say that the picture was deliberately more fully each day, or developing fully each day, just as photographic film under chemical action develops a negative. The woman's bizarre story was told and retold in the farm kitchens and the village blacksmith shop, and along the dusty roads of Cherokee County. Eventually, a few more townsfolk came forward and agreed that they too had saw the features of a man on the tombstone. Was the power of suggestion working on unconscious minds, or were heat waves uh, weaving patterns on polished stone? Eyewitnesses reported that the face, was becoming incredibly distinct, the lines deeply etched. Someone suggested that marble dealer be asked to examine the phenomenon. The expert came and trudged up to the little hillside burial ground. After studying the stone with great care, he explained that the features were being developed as a result of exposure to atmospheric influence of the rust and the veins in the marble. He predicted that the portrait would continue to grow plainer. It did. At last law enforcement officials visited the graveyard, and even the most skeptical detective admitted that he could indeed see the features of a man's face in the shining marble. Soon people from miles away began to visit the grave, and everyone who had ever seen Will Florence declared that the face bore a striking resemblance to him. While these pilgrimages to the graveyard were taking place, new evidence indicated Florence and the Schultz murder reached to the office of the prosecutor's attorney of Cherokee County. The prosecutor, confident that he could now prove the guilt of the suspected man, ordered a vigorous search for him. Florence was never found, but his guilt remained stamped upon the marble tombstone atop the graves of Heinrich and Olga Schultz. The next story is Old Chapel. Church steeple evergreens crowd the large brick building, circling in vines. Ribbons of old paint curl from the rotting windows, casting an ancient silver maple casts. Long shadows near the entrance door that was locked, chained, and bolted. This is Old Chapel on the campus of Simpson College in Indianola, Iowa. For years, students, faculty, and alumni and employees had both cherished and feared this 115-year-old building that had served as a library and conservatory. Even before it was condemned in 1980 because of the crumbling ceilings and unsafe stairs. No one loitered on the premises after dark. Strange things happened here. Mysterious lights bulbed around inside the building, and it was empty. Something climbs creaking stairs, and shadowy forms pace the halls and peer with sightless eyes through third-floor windows. The sinister legends date back to the late 19th century, when a young man, distraught by a failed romance, hung himself in the belfry of Old Chapel. After his death, friends believed they saw him wandering the gloomy halls or gazing out a window. Skeptics, however, say that the suicide tale was a myth handed down after a professor had hung in effigy in the tower. A woman student also supposedly hung herself in the chapel's tower. The words "In Memoriam" follow a student's name in a 1924 yearbook, yet alumni who were there in the 1920s recall only that something happened. The tower was later destroyed in a storm and never rebuilt. At least 2 women are believed to have died horrifying deaths when they fell over the railing of the chapel's wooden staircase and plummeted 3 flights down the open stairwell. A young man also was thought to have died after losing his footing from the rickety steps and tumbling down them. A woman supposedly hanged herself from the massive chandelier visible through the Palladian window on the second floor. Yet dark deeds have sometimes been attributed unjustifiably to the building that witnessed so many deaths. In at least one instance, in 1880, a young student fell to his death in another campus building was reported to have been killed in Old Chapel. Over the years, these legends have been told and retold until fact and fiction are inseparable. Nevertheless, the presence of ghosts in the old building is generally not in dispute. 7 students tell of meeting the apparition of a young woman on the stairs. One member of the group insists that the ghost talked to him. "She wants to be left alone," he reportedly said. A security guard was badly frightened at meeting a translucent figure in the corridor one night, and a cleaning lady told a news reporter that she knew mysterious things went on all the time. She claimed that she and her coworkers consistently saw things they couldn't explain. They found basement lights turned on when no one was in the building, and lights on the 3rd floor would blink on and off. Electricians repeatedly checked the wiring and switches and could find no reason for erratic behavior of the lights. On a chilly night in November 1979, Connecticut ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the campus. The couple, students of occult phenomena for nearly 40 years, had examined the allegedly possessed house on Long Island, New York, which was featured in the book and film The Amityville Horror. After lecturing on paranormal phenomena to more than 300 students and faculty members, the ghost hunters entered Old Chapel just before midnight. They were accompanied by 50 students, photographers, and press reporters. The crowd waited on the main floor while the Warrens worked their way up the staircase through the drafty corridors all the way to the 3rd floor, gathering psychic vibrations and impressions. The couple soon determined that the building was occupied by someone not of flesh and blood. Yes, definitely have an earthbound ghost in the building, Warren told an Associated Press reporter. She died here, and she convinced herself that she didn't. She might have been contemplating suicide, but she didn't want to die at the end. Miss Warren entered a light trance in order to communicate with the spirit. She's a dark-haired girl in her 20s, she said. Her voice seemed to come from a distant place. She was wearing a skirt well below her knees. The description was close to the one obtained by Twyla Dillard in her research on the ghost of Simpson College. She told the Wire service reporter that we pretty well confirmed that in 1935 a young woman either fell or jumped over the third-floor railing. She died later. She had heels and a long skirt and armload of books, Dillard said. Apparently she caught her heel and fell. Miss Warren was pleased to have a description of the spirit that clearly matched her own. She had been given no information on the code before she had contact with the ghost, and college officials agreed that this is the one legend which has some basis in fact. Curiously, the same ghost may have captured that evening on film. Later, when a student photographer in the group processed his film from the evening, he saw he had photographed from what they is a reflection of a female ghost. A few nights after the Warrens' visit, Greg states a hypnosis and psychic that another group through the building states knew nothing of its history. The spirit might be angry at the way he died, or perhaps it was a foolish death, like if he fell in front of the carriage or tripped over a root on a cliff, deaths that could have been avoided, he said. As the group moved silently through the cavernous building, the candles cast wavering shadows on the walls. States detailed the death of 5 students whom he felt had perished there, but he determined that there was no ghost left in the building. I believe they were here, he said, but I don't feel there has been any entity here for maybe 2 years. But States had some reactions he himself had not anticipated. He said he had a burning sensation in his arm, one side of his face, all day. After spending several hours in the old chapel, he was convinced that someone was burnt there. I feel they are still alive, he said, and carrying the scars today. Later, the group learned that certain opera parodies stored on the 3rd floor of the building had been retrieved from a fire in Center House on the campus some months earlier and taken to Old Chapel for safekeeping. They also feels that someone had contracted food poisoning in the building and died elsewhere. According, there is a woman in the 1920s who died from an infection and whose body lay in state in Old Chapel. A college publisher didn't know exactly what the infection was, but recalled that it had something to do with her mouth. Long before dawn, the students blew out their candles. They had not met a single ghost. Pushing open the heavy double doors, they shivered as the night air rushed in. States lingered for a moment, beaming his flashlight toward the the third-floor stairs, where he had experienced an uneasy feeling earlier. Then he snapped off his flashlight and left. As the building's door swung shut behind him, he muttered, "Thought I saw something. I guess not." It was nothing. Right, next story is The Messenger. In 1949, Ellen Worrell and her husband Hall lived in a century-old house in Oskaloosa that had been remodeled into apartments. The Worrells lived at one end of the top of the floor, and the opposite end lived a young widow, Patricia Burns. The landlady told the Worrells that Patricia had lost her husband, Raymond, in an industrial accident several months before, and had moved to the city to rebuild her life. Patricia was an accomplished pianist, and Elaine often heard music coming from the woman's tiny apartment. When the two women met in the hall, they exchanged smiles, but that was all. Elaine respected her neighbor's privacy. One Saturday, while Hall was away at work, Elaine felt uneasy, but she didn't know why. Perhaps a warm bath would relax her. Slipping into her robe, she edged down the hall towards the bathroom. As she grabbed for the light cord in the dark room, pipe smoke filled the air. Elaine spun around. A young man lingered in the bathroom doorway. Black hair curled all over his face, and a faint horseshoe-shaped scar outlined his left cheekbone. Cupped in one of his hands was a briar pipe. Elaine was unable to scream. Instead, she stared closely at the mysterious visitor. He was not a tenant. Elaine knew that. Sorry. Anyway. Crap, that name was my spot. I'm sorry. Elaine was unable to scream. Instead, she stared closely at the mysterious visitor. He was not a tenant. She knew that. But how could he get into the house, then? What did he want? While Elaine searched the man's gray eyes for answers, she was struck by the fact that he never blinked. It was as if he were not really seeing her. Elaine knew that then the figure was not real. The apparition turned and moved toward Patricia Burns' apartment. Elaine swept by in unaccountable compulsion, followed at the door of Patricia's apartment. The ghost vanished. Elaine found Patricia's door unlocked and hesitantly entered the apartment. In the bedroom, the young woman lay with her wrists slashed. She was barely conscious. Elaine put tourniquets on Patricia's wrists, then phoned her husband, Hall, at work. He arrived in a few minutes with a doctor who stitched the woman's wounds. The next day, Patricia thanked Elaine for saving her life. She told Elaine that she had been drinking and overcome by depression, and decided to join her husband in death. Elaine said nothing of her own mysterious encounter, but she quickly realized that Patricia had slashed her own wrist at about the same time she had seen the ghost. Later that evening, Patricia showed Elaine a picture of her deceased husband. Elaine shuddered. It was the apparition she had seen in the bathroom. She had never seen a picture of Raymond Burns, nor heard his description. until the moment. Yet somehow Raymond Burns had sensed his wife's moment of crisis and returned to lead a stranger to the bedside of his stricken widow. The Haunting of Ham House. Let's see. Dubuque pioneer Matthias Ham built his home to last. The 23-room Victorian Gothic mansion shuttled a windwrecked vault on the city's north end. Its native limestone walls as sound today as the day they were completed. This antebellum house had always been the pride of Dubuque, a symbol a symbol of wealth and a statement of the owner's faith in the future of this Mississippi River town. Yet for years, frightening tales have been told of strange lights moving through the vast, dark corridors of the mansion, and cold sun breezes that seemed to have no natural origin. The energetic Ham prospected in lead mining, lumbering, and agriculture, and operating a fleet of vessels to ship the products up and down the river. The thriving Ham then married Aurelia Marquand, his childhood sweetheart, in 1837. 3 years later, he built a small two-story rock house containing 5 rooms. It was considered lavish for its time, and most of the surrounding houses were of log construction. In 1856, Zarelita died, leaving him with 5 children. He was devastated by her death and by a number of business revises that followed. In 1857, while the Dubuque Federal Customs House was under construction, several loads of stone shipped from the southern Illinois were rejected because of inferior quality. Matthias Ham thought these and erected a 3-story addition to his Lincoln Avenue home for himself and his family. Then in 1860, he married Margaret McLean, who bore him 2 more children. As Ham was recuperating his losses, he completed his Dubuque mansion, finished it with taste and elegance. Soon the Hams were once again socially prominent. Their parties began well known, and guests felt honored to be invited. Many partygoers noted the exquisite platter rosettes and moldings of the 14-foot ceiling. Right? The beautifully decorated windows, castings, and the burnished walnut staircases remarked that Matthias Ham had thought of everything, but there were things about the Ham house that fawning guests would never know. For instance, 25 creaky stairs led from the 3rd floor up into a tall cupola that, like a giant crown, topped the building and afforded a splendid view of the river. Legends say that Ham had built it to observe the movement of a ship. Pirates still roam the Mississippi River, plundering steamboats, carrying lumber, foodstuffs, and various supplies, and Ham's spying eventually led to the capture of a band of pirates. When the pirates vowed vengeance, the Ham children seemed more excited than frightened. Margaret Ham died in the house in 1874, and in 1889, just short of his 84th birthday, Matthias died. Of the children, all but May and Sarah had already scattered. May died first in 1890, leaving Sarah alone in the mansion. Late one night, while reading in her third-floor bedroom, Sarah thought she heard a prowler. The pirate's story of years ago crossed her mind, but she didn't get up to investigate. In the morning, Sarah told a neighbor that she had heard the prowler again. She would put a light in the window as a call for help. Several nights later, Sarah was again reading in her room. Distinct sounds came from somewhere deep within the house, probably the first floor. She put aside her book and called out, "Who's there?" No one answered. Sarah locked her door, lit the lamp, and put it in the window. Then, taking up a gun, she sat waiting. Heavy footsteps crossed the front hall and climbed the long flights of stairs. They stopped outside the bedroom. Sarah Ham fired 2 shots through the door. Later, neighbors found a trail of blood leading from Sarah's door through the house and out into the night. The intruder, an old river pirate, died at the river's edge from the gunshot wounds inflicted by Sarah. Some say the mysterious light now seen moving through the Ham mansion at night is a lamp carried by a murdered outlaw searching for his assailant. Since 1964, the Matthias Ham House has been operated as a museum by the Dubuque County Historical Society, and Society employees regularly report a number of strange, inexplicable incidents. For example, a window in an upper hall will be found open from time to time after being securely locked the night before. A strong spring holds the lock in place, and workers believe the window couldn't open accidentally, even if muffled by wind. By gusts of wind. In that same upper hallway, a repaired light works only part of the night. An electrician came to fix the light, but after he left, it behaved as erratically as before. Called back again, the electrician told Courier W. Grayson there was no way the light could not work, but it was never been dependable. Lights in the front room of the Ham house are usually turned on and off by screwing and unscrewing a fuse. One summer night, an assistant curator, who was closing the museum for the night, heard the sound of a pump organ when she unscrewed the fuse. When she screwed the fuse tightly back in, the organ sound ceased. The curator became badly frightened and fled. Ironically, there is a pump organ in the house, but it is closed and cannot be played. On still another occasion, Dubuque police officers conducted a routine check of the premises, noticing a light burning in the hallway of the house's older section. They called Graysinger, who went to turn off the light alone. She later told a news reporter that it was one of the most frightening experiences of my life. I entered the front door and went to the end of the hall to turn off the burglar alarm. Once you open the front door, you only have a few seconds to throw the switch or the alarm will go off. Then I groped the fuse so I could turn on the light. It was dark, and it was the first time I was in the house alone at night. I seemed to feel a presence. John Scoopland, a tour guide, also feels that someone or something is in the house. He spent an evening there in the fall of 1978, and sometime after 3 o'clock in the morning heard women's voices in the yard outside. Scoopland checked and could find no one. Returning to the house, he then heard footsteps on the second floor of the original part of the house. He investigated but again found nothing. Later he heard soft, shuffling noises in the basement, as if someone were entering or leaving through some sort of tunnel. Scoopland didn't go down, though there is a tunnel which was carved in 20 feet beyond the basement wall. Local legend says that there's a buried treasure at the end of the tunnel. Many Dubuquin County Historical Society employees have felt ill at ease in certain parts of the museum. On the third floor, for instance, one can feel icy winds, icy winds, and strange chills, as well as hear quite clearly noises from other parts of the house, especially when standing near the stairway to the tower. Supposedly, a man hanged himself in that tower sometime before 1900, but no verification of the incident can be made. Thus, for over a century, this dark and brooding mansion, once housing the cream of Iowa gentility, had sheltered the living and the dying, making it difficult, if not impossible, to identify who roamed the premises. Could it be the nameless pirate who searches for his killer, or possibly Matthias, him himself guarding his home forever from some vengeful plunderers? Alright, next story is Punctual Vote. Emil Vigil slept. Beside him his wife, Anna, stirred uneasily. The parlor clock downstairs had just struck 2 o'clock when the hinges on the back cellar door whined. Anna heard the bottom of the door scrape the steel as the door was forced open. Someone was in the cellar. Heavy footsteps crossed the cellar floor and started up the stairs into the kitchen. Anna nudged her husband awake, and he held her tightly in his arms. He heard the intruder tromp across the kitchen floor, then into the parlor. The front door clicked open and slammed shut. The footsteps were gone. Emil got up and went downstairs. The front door was still bolted from the inside. The windows were closed and locked. Emil went to the cellar and found that the door secure also. Yet someone had walked through the house. Both he and Anna had heard the footfalls. It was no dream. The next night the incident occurred. And the next night, and the next. Always at the same hour, Anna became tense and frightened. She and Emil had scrimmed and saved for so long to buy the frame house. Uh, in Fort Madison in March of 1879. Now it was May. In just 2 months, Anna's dream house had turned into a nightmare. On a number of occasions, Anna and Emil sat up late to watch for whatever was getting into the house. Sometimes they could hear the footsteps near the house. Parting the lace curtains, they peered through the darkened windows, but never saw a living thing. Night after night, Emil checked the house after the ghost had left. Front and back doors were always solidly bolted. There was no sign of forced entry. Who was it that entered the house and walked in the night? One evening Emil was called to the bedside of a dying relative who lived nearby. He kissed his wife good-bye and assured her he'd be back soon. Anna, tossed in bed, heard the clock strike again and again. The cellar door opened. Anna knew she must confront the thing herself, find out what it was and what it wanted. With trembling fingers, she tucked her hair into her nightcap and went to the head of the cellar stairway. A heavy-set man was climbing the rough wooden stairs. He came steadily towards her as if unaware of her presence. He sported a full gray beard and a red shirt, open at the neck. When he was 3 steps from the top of the stairs where Anna stood, she fainted. She came to. Emil was at her side. He listened attentively to her story. Neither he nor Anna knew anyone fitting Anna's description. Emil checked the house and the yard. Nothing but the mist. Emil knew there was only one way to rid his house of whatever was getting into it. He loaded his gun.
Sorry, something went wrong.
Sorry. He loaded his gun, and the next night he crouched in the basement by the outside door, waiting for the intruder. When he heard footsteps outside of the cellar door, he fired 2 shots to the door. A moment later he flung it open. Only the smoke from his weapon rose in the night air. In the morning, Emil and Anna moved out of the house. But others came. Curious visitors from all parts of the city thronged to the house, some bringing Federals to camp for the night in hopes of seeing the ghost. A policeman seemed shaken by his visit, but was unwilling to talk of his experience. Eventually, the windows and doors of the house were boarded up. It was finally sold, then resold a number of times. No one stayed long. On Wednesday evening, August 16, 1899, the old house at 2426 Desmoses Street burned to the ground. It was then owned and rented out by Charles Walker, a grocer living on the corner of the Occident and Division Street. His last tenant, the Sadley family, and a widow named Reb, had moved only that morning. Some people claim that a group of boys had set fire to the house. Others say that the ghost himself had destroyed it. The time of the calamitous blaze? Somewhere in the vicinity of 2 o'clock. Alright, next story is Miss Weaver's Peculiar Table. It was the kind of table you would expect to find and a used furniture store. Heavy oak, heavy oak, stained dark brown, with its oval top and two shelves. It was a sturdy, utilitarian piece of furniture, but the James Weaver family of 1942 Francis Avenue, Des Moines, wished the table weren't in their living room. They found it far from ordinary. Rappings from the inside table were heard all over the house. It sounded as if someone's knuckles were knocking on the tabletop. At first the Weavers ignored the strange sounds. Then they laughed at them. But then the noises persisted. Miss Weaver took the table apart, finding nothing to account for the rapping. He reassembled the table and applied a coat of fresh varnish. The table still rapped. The family moved it to another part of the room, but the noise was as loud and persistent as ever. Miss Ford Clearwater, a married daughter of the Weavers, had originally bought the table in 1935 from a second-hand furniture antiquaire for 50 cents. She kept it for 2 years and heard no rappings. Then she sold the table to a friend, who likewise heard no noise. In late 1937, Miss Weaver bought it from her daughter's friend for 75 cents. She had always admired the table and knew it would be a perfect place for her pictures and plants. Shortly after Miss Weaver bought the table into the house, it began to rap. Since it happened only occasionally, however, no one but the family were aware of the phenomenon. They never talked about it with friends and relatives. Miss Weaver didn't think it proper. But the noisy table soon became an embarrassment. Friends who dropped in for an evening would be startled by its strange noises. Led to the Weavers' 33-year-old unmarried daughter, who lived at home, would say offhandedly, "Oh, don't pay any attention. It's just our spooky table." The table made Miss Weaver incredibly nervous, and finally she persuaded her husband to contact a minister. Wilbur and Madeline Cornman, co-pastors of the McDivitt Grove Open Bible Church, soon visited the Weavers' home. The table made no noise while the Cormans were there, but Miss Corman opted that it was possessed by evil spirits. Placing her hand on the table, she read from the Bible and led the family in prayer. The table was quiet that night, and the next day, and the next. A week passed. Miss Weaver was clearly relieved. She didn't understand how evil spirits came to be lodged into her table. She was only happy that they were gone. But her joy was premature. 2 weeks after the ministers visited, the table resumed its rapping. Cornmans advised the Weavers to destroy the table. Instead, Miss Weaver got in touch with the spiritualist, a Miss E. A. Hank of 1524 Center Street. Miss Hank thought that the table might have been used by a spiritualist medium, or one time, and the rap were the cries of a bewildered spirit. She advised the Weavers to talk to the table. But the Cornmans are against that, Miss Weaver told a news reporter. And now I don't know what to do. Neither did anyone else in the family. Lita was entertaining a young woman friend one afternoon and telling her about the table and Miss Hank's theory. She laughed. The table wrapped. But then the weaver's 29-year-old son, Boyd, who also lived at the house, worked as an iceman, brought his girlfriend home one night to hear the table wrap. It was silent. That was the most exacerbating thing, said Miss Weaver. The table is so unpredictable. You can never tell when it's going to wrap. One day, in the middle of September 1940, the weaver's daughter, Miss Clearwater, and her sons, Kenneth, 13, and James, 10, were visiting. The table set a record by rapping 6 times. Everyone heard the rapping, and the last time that occurred, Miss Clearwater and Kenneth saw the table jump. Kenneth said he wasn't afraid, but his brother was. So was their mother. She was not well, and the incident greatly upset her. Miss Weaver and Floyd remained calm, at least outwardly, but Miss Weaver and Lita were worried by what they took to be an ominous event. The table had never moved before. What did it mean? And what did the increase in the frequency of the rapping mean? In the beginning, the table had rapped only once a week, or maybe twice. I remember the cornman's visit. Miss Weaver placed the Bible on the table and hung over it in a wall motto, "The Lord is my shepherd." But the evil spirits remained undeterred by the religious article. The next day the table rapped louder than ever. Incredible as it sounds, Miss Weaver refused to get rid of the table. Parapsychologists classify knocks as a physical if someone present hears them. There was true in the case of the weaver's table. In fact, the table also performed for strangers as well as for family members, suggest the antics of a genuine poltergeist. In so far as is known, experts did not study this case. Most amongst many cases of rapping is furniture that have been thoroughly investigated. A normal cause is rarely found. Alright, the next story, and I believe it might be the last. George the Mischievous Ghost. In 1968, Jim and Sue Anderson moved into a rambling clapboard house in Des Moines. It had an upstairs sleeping porch, narrow, double-hung windows, and gingerbread trim. The house was once owned by Jim's grandparents, and the young couple was delighted to be raising their family in such a spacious, comfortable quarters. But one night, shortly after they had moved in, the delight turned into horror. Jim was visiting a friend. At 10 o'clock, he phoned his wife to tell her he'd stayed a while longer. Sue was tired, and although she usually waited up for her husband, she went to bed. The children were already in bed and asleep. Sue was drifting off when she heard her husband come in the back door, walk through the downstairs hall, into the pantry. Then the phone rang. She lifted the receiver from the bedroom phone. "Hi, honey," said Jim. "I'm just leaving. See you soon." "Wise guy," cracked Sue. "I already heard you come in. But, honey, I'm not in the house." Not in the house. But someone was. Sue gripped the phone in both hands. She could hear the hum of the dial tone. Her husband hung up. She eased the receiver into its cradle, went to the bedroom door and cracked it open. Footsteps squeaked on the freshly waxed kitchen floor. She tiptoed across the upstairs hallway to the children's room and gathered her young son and daughter in her arms. Back in the master bedroom, she locked the door and tucked the children into bed with her. Moments later, footsteps raced up the staircase, shake the walls of the old house. She saw the glass knob turn. Then the pounding began. "Sue, open up, it's me." The voice was unmistakable. She flung open the door and collapsed under her husband's arms. When the front doorbell rang, Jim ran downstairs. "It's Crime Alert," he shouted over his shoulder. "I phoned them before I left Bill's place." Sue wrapped herself in a bathrobe and followed her husband downstairs. The officers listened to her account of the intruder, then fanned out through the house. They searched from basement to attic, shifting furniture, trunks, and boxes, poking into dark corners with their flashlights. They found nothing. Windows and doors in the basement and on the first floor were all locked, and there was no indication of any tampering. No one could have entered the house. After the officers left, Sue felt foolish, yet she knew she had not imagined the incident. Someone had walked through the house. Late one evening, a few months later, Sue was ironing on the upstairs sleeping porch when she heard a knock at the window. She put down the iron and looked out, but the inside light prevented her from seeing beyond the dark window glass. Then it came again. Knuckle-sharp rat-tat-tats on the window. Sue snapped off the light and walked to the wall of the window. Cupping her hands to her face, she peered out. Moonlight washed the high limbs of the old cottonwood and the grove of walnut trees at the far property line. No leaf stirred in the night air. Besides, there were no close tree limbs that could have scratched against the windows. No outside stairway led to the porch. What had made the noise? Sue went to bed, but didn't sleep well. On another evening, Sue finished washing the dinner dishes and set bags of garbage in the adjacent mudroom. In the morning, she'd take them out to the garbage can, but the next morning the bags were gone. Jim checked the trash cans. They were empty. The couple searched the house, but never found the bags. Several times during that year, the couple would come downstairs early in the morning to find lights blazing in the hallway and den, and front and back doors standing open. The double locks on the doors were not broken, just unlocked from the inside. The children were not sleepwalking, and their parents, not wishing to alarm the youngsters, had said nothing to them about the burning lights and the open doors. Sue wondered if a ghost was inhabiting the house, but scoffed at the idea. "It's silly," she said. "Who'd believe stuff like that? I don't." Jim shared her feelings, and he figured that there was a logical explanation for everything, but he had failed to find one. During the couple's second year in the house, her small daughter reported at breakfast one morning that a man had come into her room during the night. She woke up suddenly and saw him standing beside her bed, smiling down at her. Since the girl wasn't upset by the incident, her parents asked no questions. Sue explained to her that Daddy had been in her room. "Oh, no, it wasn't," said the child. Sue was greatly distressed. Perhaps her daughter had seen some kind of reflection. Some time later, Sue invited her friend Kathy to spend the evening. The two women sat in the living room, and during the course of the conversation she mentioned the odd events of the past year. Kathy, who was interested in the occult and had some psychic abilities, interrupted. "There's a spirit standing in the corner of the room." Sue saw nothing. Kathy said the ghost had a gentle smile on its face and would not harm the family. Sue glanced nervously at her watch. It was 10 o'clock. The conversation drifted to other topics, and toward night time the friend left. Sue carried the coffee cups to the kitchen, and then she returned to the living room. She noticed the wall clock, and it stopped at 10. The same clock stopped at 10 o'clock for 3 nights, when it quit running altogether. For years, to Sue's relief, nothing more happened. She had spent many sleepless nights worried about whether the mischievous ghost would return and harm her daughter. The next fall the ghost came back. The Andersons were entertaining dinner guests, Linda and Al Peters. Linda and Sue lingered over coffee at the dinner table. Suddenly Linda stared into the adjacent living room and shouted, "Look, there's a white misty figure pacing back and forth." Sue saw nothing. Then Linda leaned back in her chair and laughed. "Of course, it's one of the guys clowning around." Sue didn't laugh. She knew Jim and Al were in the kitchen. Her fears returned. 3 nights later, Linda, Kathy, and another young woman were at the Andersons' house to work on a craft project for a bazaar. Midway in the evening's work, Sue served coffee and cookies, and the room buzzed with friendly small talk. Linda mentioned that her white car had been missing for 4 months. Her white cat, my bad. The animal had never strayed from home, and Linda and her husband couldn't understand the cat's sudden disappearance. They had asked neighbors and ran advertisements in the newspaper, but no clues were forthcoming. No one had seen the cat. When the women finished their evening's work and prepared to leave, Sue turned on the porch, and a white cat was curled up on the steps. Linda was astonished. It was her cat. She cradled it in her arms, and it purred and blinked its green eyes. Where had the cat been, and why did it appear just then on the Andersons' porch? Andersons were as mystified as Linda. However, they sensed that their mischievous ghost was somehow involved. By now, Sue was desperate for answers. Suggested getting a Ouija board. Her husband agreed. Perhaps they could learn the identity of the visitor and find out what he wants. The couple sat face to face in the living room, the board across their knees. Then Sue asked about the ghost. The marker spun around on the board, spelling out George. It says that Greg has lived on his land in the early 1800s, that he couldn't want to be here. He didn't want to be here, but that he would not harm them. Sue then checked records at Poley County Courthouse, but deed transfers prior to 1866 were not available. She failed to locate any information on anyone named George who had lived on the tract of land on which the house stood. Damn. The Ouija board yielded no further information. In the fall of 1972, the ghost became unusually active. One afternoon, Soon and a friend were in the basement when the television set suddenly blared forth from an upstairs room. Both women raced up the stairs. No one here. No one else was in the house who had turned on the set. A couple days later, Sue was alone, working in the kitchen, when she heard a crash in the basement. She ran downstairs to find a large mirror shattered to bits on the floor. The nail remained in the wall, and the wire was still firmly attached to the back frame. The mirror hung in the same space since the day they'd moved it into the house. In November of that year, Jim often awakened in the middle of the night. He'd seen a man standing beside the bed, staring down at him. He'd awake Sue, and they'd both get up and turn the light on. But no one was ever in the room. At least no one they could see. One night, Jim got up and went to the bathroom. As he stared back to the bedroom, he saw a man standing against the wall of the hallway staring at him. Jim edged past the figure. For some unclear reason, Jim, like his daughter, was not afraid of the dark specter. That winter, Sue and her family decided to hold a multi-family garage sale. Lacking table space to display small household items, women made shelves by putting boards across the rungs of two upright ladders. Everything was stored in the Andersons' locked garage. On the morning of the sale, Sue unlocked the garage. All the items had been placed on the makeshift shelves, lay broken and strewn about on the concrete floor. The ladders and boards remained sturdily in place. The only access to the garage was through the door. And that's the last that they had heard of George. Or was it? That's that. That is the end of chapter 3. Thank you for being with me for this long read. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.